The Holy Gospel according to Luke.
When they came to the place that is called the Skull, they crucified Jesus there with the criminals. One was on his right, and one was on his left. Then Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And they cast lots to divide his clothing, and the people stood by watching, but the leaders scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Messiah of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." Now one of the criminals who were hanged there kept deriding him and saying, "Are you not the Messiah? Save yourself and save us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed have been condemned justly, for we are getting what we deserve for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." Then he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus replied, "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The Gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. The government, regardless of what type of government we're talking about, it could be a republic, a democratic republic, it could be a monarchy, it could be a totalitarian state, a communist state, social democratic state. It really doesn't matter what kind of government we're talking about. All governments have something uniquely in common, and that is to keep the peace. It's not spoken so much, but the architecture of government, this combination of business, economics, culture, religion, politics is fused together into a structure that is the underpinning of the society from which it governs. And it cannot govern very well if there is an uprising. And so the architecture of government and all of these entities that make it so attempt to adjust life and policies and things in such a way that people understand their place, understand their roles, follow the law, and there is this sense of civic peace, which is totally different than the peace that we talk about here, the shalom, the peace that surpasses all understanding. This is a different kind of peace. Everyone must know their place regardless of the country they live in or the government that governs them. And with that sort of understood, I was struck today by this lesson, and particularly the conversation that took place between the two criminals, you see. The one criminal that suggested, in so many words, that Jesus was innocent, that he did not deserve to be on that cross. Well, the one thing I'm pretty sure about this criminal, he wasn't too good of a criminal. He got caught. And he wasn't a very good judge or a lawyer because he didn't really understand what was going on. You see, to suggest that Jesus was innocent is to profoundly discount the purpose of the cross. You see, Jesus always understood it would end this way. He understood the laws of the land. He understood the condition of humankind that he was attempting to address. He knew where it would end. And if we look back to Jesus and this whole idea of stirring things up, we go back to even that very first sermon he delivered in his hometown of Nazareth. When he walked up and he looked at the scroll of Isaiah and he said, "The Spirit of God has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor, to set the captive free, to free people from the oppression that exists within their lives. The Spirit of God has come into me to declare this acceptable year of the Lord." And then he rolled up the scroll and he said, "This prophecy is fulfilled and you are hearing it." It suggested clearly that there was a condemnation of what was going on in Palestine during his day, when 90% of the people were living in a subsistence way and 10% were living in a very different way. Rome was in control. The temple leadership was in cahoots with Rome. He set the stage for the next 3 years. Almost didn't get out of there alive. If you remember, they tried to, his own hometown, after they heard the words of Jesus, the favorite son, they wanted to throw him off a cliff. They obviously didn't succeed. But he moved on with his ministry, and when we look at the Beatitudes, those sermons on the plain or the Sermon on the Mount, he made it very clear that there will be blessings for the poor and woes to the rich. He was attempting to reframe and reshape society. He was inviting people into the shalom, the peace that surpasses all understanding. He was advocating for the poor. He was providing compassion for those who were suffering. He was working with people, attempting to pull this thing together. And all the while, he recognized how it would end. If we read the Gospels closely, we recognize that his life was filled with angst. It wasn't comfortable. They weren't easy steps he was taking. We think of him as fully God and fully man, and he was fully God and he was fully man, and that fully man was filled with fear. He recognized that shalom was a difficult thing for people to swallow. It wasn't necessarily going to get any easier. And he knew how it would end. Now there are those who would say, well, no, Jesus really, he was a peaceful guy. He followed the law, and then they would mention the story about someone showing Jesus a coin, and is it right to pay taxes to Caesar? And Jesus looks at the coin and he says, "Give to Caesar that which is Caesar, and give to God that which is God." He was not going to get tripped up. That was not going to change the message of shalom, even if people paid taxes. That is not a justification for not moving forward. And so this King of Kings, our Christ the King, he was guilty. He was guilty of what is called sedition. It's an old legal term. We don't use it much in the United States anymore. It's been covered up by freedom of speech. But basically, the idea of sedition is that speech and activity positioned in such a way that it may stimulate a type of unrest. And if the unrest is significant enough, a person in the United States back in the day may have been imprisoned, and people were imprisoned for sedition as much as 20 years. But if we go all the way back in time into the ancient Near East and Rome, sedition would get you the cross. And this is what happened. And so, he died for us so that we could be set free. He died for us so that we could proclaim peace. He died for us to give us a roadmap on how to live, how to work, how to play. He was never going to compromise that message. He knew full well how it would end. Now, the fact of the matter is, for each of us, we are uniquely gifted, and we recognize this notion of peace, this notion of shalom, compassion, mercy, justice, and forgiveness. These are the dimensions of the living waters that create new life for all of us and potentially for the world. It was what Jesus preached every day. It was what got him killed. But we recognize that we are all gifted to share that peace with each other in the world. And the fact of the matter is, we're all a little bit different. We're all not equally designed to necessarily actualize every dimension of peace. Some of us may be stronger in doing compassion work. Some of us might be naturally gifted into compassion work. Others of us might be more into mercy and more charitable giving and just of this very giving, life-giving situation. Others may be doing different things. And some of us may be uniquely gifted to do social justice. We're all a little bit different, but what we're called to do as we celebrate Christ the King is we're called to actualize this notion of shalom in our life. And for each of us, it will be different. And that's okay. We're not all called to do the same thing. Now, today I am wearing my brother's stole and his cross. My brother was a Lutheran pastor back in the day for about 15 years. He preached shalom, but he uniquely was gifted and driven into social justice. He left the pews and to go into the street and to work on behalf of the civil rights movement at a time when it was early in the stages of civil rights. And he recognized that, as he looked in his own life, he recognized that most of the people in his life, when they got their start, they got their job, they got whatever they got their start in life, a lot of it had to do with who do you know, see. It's who you know that matters. And he recognized that there were big segments of society that were so poor, so impoverished, that they would not know anyone to take the next step, and so he took that step. But for him, that was shalom. For him, that was the way he would live out the gospel for the rest of his life. We're not all equipped to do that or predisposed, but the good news is we all have something we can share. We all have the opportunity through our faith and through the gifts and talents that God has given us to make peace in this world and to recognize that the peace that we are making comes to us through the blood of the cross. And so let us hold true to this truth and press on. Amen.